it is very much competition in the innovative sectors. That's well put. And it's not just artificial intelligence, it's electric vehicles, it's solar cells, it's batteries, it's robotics, it's fission, it's fusion, it's quantum computing. And China has made incredible strides in many of those areas. And our the article that Gordon Hanson and I wrote really was trying to wake up U.S. policymakers to the idea that the China they think they're competing with is the China that overran U.S. in furniture manufacturing and textiles and toys and assembly of electronics 20 years ago. But that's really not the battle that we're facing now. China has moved way up the value chain, and in fact is already losing a lot of that labor-intensive manufacturing to Vietnam, to Cambodia, to Laos, to lower wage countries. But that's fine for China because China has made such impressive investments in in frontier sectors like in electric vehicles and batteries and drones and so on. And it's done that through a variety of tools. But one of them is very vigorous state-led industrial policy, where it's not a case of China picking winners and losers, but really seeding investment and creating kind of vigorous Darwinian competition to weed out the weak sperms and have the strong ones ready for battle. In fact, earlier in the hour, you were speaking of the kind of incredible price wars of electric vehicles in China. And that is actually a reflection of Chinese industrial policy. So it's brutal. It's not even that profitable for all the firms involved, but it does create great national champions. Companies like BYD or CATL, which makes electric batteries, or DJI, which makes drones. None of these companies is more than 30 years old, and yet they are world leaders in their sectors.
Now, you bring this up, EV battery maker Contemporary Amperex, it just listed in Hong Kong a couple weeks back. It is off limits to U.S. investors. EV maker BYD, as well as drone maker DJI. The FCC is on its basically a list where it is under national security review. What's also unique to these companies, they are number one in their industry, but they're also not servicing the U.S. market. Can you talk about that?
Well, actually, Warren Buffett is a huge investor in BYD, the great U.S. investor. So, in fact, it got its start, some of its seed capital came from the United States. But yeah, the U.S. has a very complex relationship with all these companies because it views them as competitors, as security threats, but also has a lot to learn from them. And so U.S. policy is rather kind of all over the place on these things. And that's what the U.S. is, and again, our article is really directed at U.S. policymakers to say we need a better strategy, that the U.S. needs to recognize that it would be much more effective if it worked with its allies, worked with Europe, worked with the United Kingdom, worked with Australia, worked with North Korea, with South Korea, with Japan, with Singapore, and others. To have unified policy that created competition, that built a large market, and simultaneously made judicious investments to build out these important sectors, create competition actually in the way that China does really quite well, and simultaneously made sure that workers successfully made the transition across these changes. So it's a very I do not think U.S. policy is fully come to grips with the nature of the challenge, the long game that we need to be playing, and how far along China is in playing that game.
So with President Trump wanting to develop domestic manufacturing in industries like steel, shipbuilding, semiconductors, are these the right sectors? Are these strategically important?
Semiconductors are strategically very important. No question of that. So is aviation, so is telecommunications, artificial intelligence, robotics. I would say shipbuilding is something the United States has actually never been good at. There were only very brief periods in our history where actually during wars when we built up capacity, we could be buying ships from our allies, from Japan, from Korea. They make they're fantastic at that. Steel, no, that's not. Steel is much closer to a commodity sector. It's not something where ever going to be a huge source of national profits or leadership. I'm glad the U.S. was able to take that big investment from Nippon Steel, Japanese company. That was a wise move, and I'm glad President Trump changed his mind about that. But no, the problem is we are tariffing and creating barriers for these commodity sectors. They're inputs into many other activities. And the US is really actually quite small as a manufacturing country, not in terms of the value added, but we have 13 million manufacturing workers at present. China has well in excess of 100 million. The exact number is actually very difficult to know from statistics that are presented, but well in excess of 100 million. The US cannot be competing in every single thing that might be manufactured. It can't be making tube socks and tennis sneakers and semiconductors and aircraft. We're just not, we don't, so we have to specialize. We have to choose our battles, the ones that we can win and the ones we can't afford to lose. If you look at the China 2025 plan, China identified a lot of those sectors and the ones it has really gained leadership in over the last decade. And I'm afraid the U.S. needs to do something similar. The U.S. has, a very, very difficult relationship with industrial policy. We don't like to talk about it. We don't like to do it except when it's military policy. And when we've done it, we've often been not that successful because the U.S. has historically chosen one or two firms and made big investments. And, that's always a risky portfolio. And usually, if you only make a couple investments, at least one of them will fail, and maybe both. What China has done more successfully, still at great cost, and with real losses in many cases, is to seed competition in strategically important sectors and let private sector actors fight it out to see who survives. And those that do survive are extremely competitive, not only within China but worldwide. And as China has many of the leading companies in these frontier sectors, and those companies are new. They're young companies, and yet they're really in many ways global leaders.